You sit down at 10 p.m., the house is quiet, everyone's asleep, and suddenly the ideas come faster than you can type. Code flows, essays write themselves, math problems that stumped you all morning now crack open in minutes. You feel sharp, focused, alive. But every productivity guru screams the opposite. Early bird gets the worm, 5 a.m. club, morning routines. So what's happening? Why does your brain light up when the sun goes down? Turns out the answer's buried in 20,000 neurons smaller than a grain of rice, molecules that spike and crash on a rhythm older than cities, and recent discoveries published between October 2025 and January 2026 that are rewriting what we thought we knew about peak mental performance. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Also, the script is researched and factual, using sources from Frontiers in Sleep, published in April 2025, examining Tokyo and London students, where Menzies and team tracked memory consolidation across circadian phases, and neuroscience research from Tohoku University, published October 31st, 2025, where researchers used optogenetics on rat visual cortex. Neurons and found identical stimuli produced different electrical responses at sunrise versus sunset, proving brain excitability follows daily rhythms tied to adenosine accumulation. Now back to the information. And it controls when you sleep, when you wake, when your body temperature peaks, when cortisol floods your system, when melatonin rises. Researchers at Washington University in St. Louis published findings and proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in December 2025, showing that only a small subset of hub cells within those 20,000 neurons actually synchronize the entire network. These hub cells express vasoactive intestinal peptide, and when you remove them, the whole rhythm collapses. The SCN divides into two regions. The ventrolateral core receives light signals straight from your retina through the retinohypothalamic tract. Glutamate and a molecule called pituitary adenylate cyclase. Activating polypeptides slam into these neurons every morning. The dorsomedial shell contains arginine vasopressin neurons that project to other brain areas and maintain the endogenous rhythm even in complete darkness. Human average? 24 hours? 11 minutes? Not exactly 24, which is why you need light to reset it daily. Research published in journals going back to 1999 and confirmed with modern techniques shows the SCN has specific sensitivity windows. Daytime? It responds to pituitary adenylate cyclase, activating polypeptide and cyclic AMP. These cause phase advances only during the day. Nighttime? Totally different. Acetylcholine and cyclic GMP take over. Light and glutamate cause phase delays in early night by spiking intracellular calcium through neuronal ryanodine receptors. Late night, they switch to a cyclic GMP-mediated mechanism and cause phase advances. In twilight, dawn, and dusk, the crepuscular domains, that's when melatonin from your pineal gland resets the clock through protein kinase C. The SCN is literally running different molecular programs depending on what hour it is. Different gates, different molecules, different outcomes. Sunset stimulation produced a completely different response. The culprit? Adenosine. Adenosine is a byproduct of energy use. Every time your neurons fire, every time ATP breaks down for fuel, adenosine accumulates. It builds up across your waking hours. By evening, levels are high. And here's the twist. High adenosine doesn't just make you sleepy, it also modulates neural excitability and plasticity. When they blocked adenosine's action in the study, brain activity increased, proving adenosine actively dampens cortical processing. But that dampening isn't uniform. It creates a different baseline state, a different window for learning and memory formation. The researchers concluded that brains have daily windows of adaptability, and for diurnal humans, those windows may peak near sunset. A study from Frontiers in Neuroscience, published March 1st, 2019, used a fluorescent sensor called D-Light 1.1 to track dopamine in the dorsal striatum of freely moving mice across the sleep-wake cycle. They found dopamine levels fluctuate dramatically. During wakefulness, dopamine signals are higher than during non-REM sleep. During REM sleep, they spike again, matching waking levels. Caffeine at 15 milligrams per kilogram promoted wakefulness for about 2 hours by spiking striatal dopamine. Modafinil at 90 milligrams per kilogram, 5 hours. Direct dopamine surge measured in real time. And where does dopamine act? The prefrontal cortex. A 2002 study in neuropsychopharmacology showed intravenous caffeine at 0.25 to 5 milligrams per kilogram dose dependently increased dopamine and acetylcholine in the medial prefrontal cortex of rats, not in the nucleus accumbens, only the prefrontal cortex. Why does that matter? The prefrontal cortex handles working memory, attention, executive function, planning. Dopamine input there is essential for cognitive performance. Rats with 6 hydroxydopamine lesions that killed prefrontal dopamine input showed massive working memory deficits in object recognition and delayed alternation tasks. Blocking adenosine, A2A receptors with a stratophyline reverse those deficits and increased prefrontal dopamine content. Adenosine and dopamine are locked in a dance. As adenosine rises in the evening, it shifts how dopamine systems respond. Biobank. They completed cognitive tests for memory, reasoning, and reaction time. Participants self-identified as morning people, evening people, or intermediate types. Results: evening types outperformed morning types on cognitive tests. Intermediate types also scored higher than morning types. The relationship held even after adjusting for age, gender, smoking, alcohol, chronic diseases. Dr. Raha West from Imperial College, London's Department of Surgery and Cancer, led the study. She stated the findings reflect an overall trend where the majority might lean towards better cognition in evening types. 7 to 9 hours of sleep was optimal. Less than 7 or more than 9, clear decline in brain function. But chronotype mattered. A follow-up systematic review published in the journal Chronobiology International on April 28, 2025, analyzed 65 studies. It confirmed the chronotype effect. Evening chronotypes showed better performance in information processing speed compared to intermediate and morning types. Morning chronotypes were associated with difficulty sustaining attention, low verbal fluency, and poor executive control skills. A study by Demirci and team published in the Journal of Turkish Sleep Medicine in 2025. With 180 participants, morning people struggled than morning types. By noon, no difference. The phases shifted. Their biological night extends later, which means their biological day, when cortisol should peak, also shifts later. Cortisol shows a characteristic rhythm with a peak in the morning and a trough at night. But for evening types, that peak comes later. They're essentially jet-lagged relative to societal schedules. When everyone else is hitting morning peak cortisol, evening types are still in their biological night. A study on Antarctic researchers, published in PMC, examined circadian cortisol and melatonin over a full year at Maitrey Station, 70 degrees south. They measured serum levels at 8 a.m., 3 p.m., 8 p.m., and 2 a.m. during polar summer and winter. Higher evening cortisol negatively correlated with attention tests like digit span and card sort during summer, but elevated 8 a.m. melatonin during winter correlated significantly with better performance on attention, digit span, and arithmetic. Seems paradoxical, but higher 8 a.m. melatonin was associated with better sleep quality, which improved performance. The timing of your hormone rhythms determines your cognitive windows. Second mechanism, neural networks rewire. A 2019 study in the journal Sleep by Facer-Childs examined circadian phenotype impacts on resting state functional connectivity using fMRI. Evening types and morning types showed different patterns of brain connectivity, different networks active at different times. The prefrontal cortex, the hub for executive function, changes its connectivity based on chronotype and time of day. A study from Northwestern University published in News Reports in November 2023 found that acute sleep loss increases dopamine release and rewires the brain. Researchers examined 4 brain regions for dopamine release after sleep deprivation in mice: prefrontal cortex, nucleus accumbens, hypothalamus, dorsal striatum. 3 of the 4 showed increased dopamine. The antidepressant effect from sleep loss disappeared only when they silenced dopamine input in the medial prefrontal cortex, that specific circuit. The effect lasted days, and when they examined neurons, they found tiny dendritic spines had formed, highly plastic features that change with brain activity. Synaptic plasticity in the prefrontal cortex was enhanced. Sleep pressure creates a temporary boost in prefrontal dopamine and plasticity. For night owls working late, this might explain the clarity. They're riding a wave of accumulated sleep pressure that paradoxically sharpens focus through dopamine and dendritic remodeling. Methylphenidate and lisdexamfetamine, drugs used to treat ADHD, are dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. 6.1% of Americans take them, up to 24.6% of boys aged 10 to 19. The study found stimulants don't primarily affect attention networks. Instead, they hit somatocognitive action regions and motor cortex, reflecting arousal state, and the salience network associated with reward, anticipation, and action-relevant memory. The salience network is tightly coupled to the prefrontal cortex. Stimulants increase arousal and reward sensitivity, not raw attention. What does that mean for evening performance? As your day wears on, your brain shifts from scattered alertness to consolidated arousal in specific circuits. The salience network lights up, reward signals become clearer. Tasks that felt like slogs in the morning suddenly feel engaging. Dopamine isn't just wakefulness juice, it's motivation fuel, and it peaks when you need it. Adolescents with ADHD show rates as high as 47.2% evening chronotype, with predominantly inattentive presentation, compared to 28.5% in neurotypical peers. Why the link? Delayed melatonin release, steeper morning cognitive slumps. But here's the kicker. Peak creative output around 9 to 11 p.m. Evening chronotype in ADHD isn't a disorder, it's a different operating system. one that thrives when the world quiets down and internal focus can finally dominate. Targeted routines that align hard tasks with evening focus windows cut, self-reported, can't wake up days by 37%, according to data from the Mind Vortex app published in July 2025. The brain isn't broken, the schedule is. A2A receptors are densely co-expressed with dopamine D2 receptors in the dorsal striatum. When adenosine binds A2A receptors, it inhibits dopamine signaling. Caffeine blocks those receptors. That's why coffee wakes you up. You're removing adenosine's brake on dopamine. But here's the nuance. Adenosine doesn't just suppress, it modulates. High adenosine in the evening shifts the brain into a different mode. A study from 2017 showed striatal adenosine A2, A receptor neurons control active period sleep via parvalbumin neurons in the external globus pallidus. Another study showed glutamic acid decarboxylase. Two positive neurons in the dorsal raphe nucleus, activated under acute stress, suppress arousal by inhibiting wake-promoting neurons in the paraventricular thalamus. Stress, adenosine, circadian phase all interact. Evening hours bring lower stress for many people. Work emails stop, phone calls end, the fight or flight system dials down, parasympathetic tone rises, heart rate variability increases. In that state, with moderate adenosine but without acute stress, the prefrontal cortex can enter a flow state. Dopamine is available. Reward circuits are primed, distractions are minimal, the window opens. It's synthesized by the adrenal glands, regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Peak levels occur between 6 and 8 a.m. for most people. Then it declines throughout the day, reaching a trough at night. But light exposure at night disrupts this rhythm. A study published in Scientific Reports in December 2019 examined the dynamics of melatonin suppression and cortisol changes in response to nocturnal light using high-frequency blood sampling. 21 young healthy participants received intermittent bright light at 9500 lux, continuous bright light, or dim light at 1 lux for 6.5 hours during biological night. Melatonin suppression occurred rapidly within the first 5 minutes under bright light, with a half-life of 13 minutes. Recovery between intermittent pulses was slower, half maximal recovery rate of 46 minutes. Cortisol showed a significant linear increase between the start and end of each intermittent bright light stimulus. Bright light at night raises cortisol. Higher cortisol at night tanks cognitive performance. That same study on Antarctic researchers found higher evening cortisol negatively correlated with digit span and card sort performance during summer. Higher evening cortisol also correlated with increased depression, anxiety, and stress scores on the DSS-42 scale. So if you're working at night, dim the lights, blue light especially. A 2024 study in Frontiers for Young Minds explained that blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production and keeps cortisol levels high, leading to sleep latency, poor sleep quality, and increased oxidative stress. When the brain can't fully recharge, you get poor cognitive performance, tiredness, poor recovery. Shutting down electronics before sleep and decreasing blue light exposure helps melatonin production, which promotes quality sleep, restfulness, recovery, and good cognitive performance the next day. But here's the trick for night work. Use warm light, low intensity. Keep cortisol low while maintaining enough light to see. Don't blast yourself with daylight spectrum LEDs at midnight. Melatonin modulates core body temperature through hypothalamic thermoregulatory centers. Lower temperature facilitates sleep. But before sleep, in the evening window, temperature is still elevated. That elevated temperature supports metabolic activity in the brain. Neurons require energy. Cooler temperatures at night would slow them down. But in the evening transition, you get the metabolic capacity of daytime without the stress hormones and distractions of full daylight hours, optimal zone. Disruptions in sleep patterns impair consolidation, leading to deficits in both declarative memory, facts and events, and procedural memory, skills and tasks. Study by Menzies, published in 2025, in Frontiers in Sleep. But here's what's less discussed. The transition into sleep, the evening hours before you crash, may be when the brain begins pre-consolidation processing. Synaptic plasticity is high. Dopamine is available. Adenosine is building, priming the system for the deep processing to come. Working at night might be leveraging this pre-sleep window where neural circuits are malleable and ready to encode. They assessed the relationship between sleep hours and cognitive decline by chronotype. Regardless of sleep quality, 7 to 8 sleep hours had the lowest risk of cognitive decline. Morningness type had lower risk of cognitive decline than intermediate type or eveningness type. But that study classified chronotypes according to wake-up time, not subjective scales or genetic variance, potential bias. And it measured decline, not peak performance. Another study with 477,529 participants from UK Biobank, published in BMJ Public Health in July 2024, found evening types performed better on all cognitive tasks except digital memory. Morning types had worse cognitive function than intermediate types. Two massive studies, different conclusions. The decline study favored morning types. The performance study favored evening types. What's the difference? Decline over time versus performance at a snapshot. Evening types may perform better in middle age, but face more long-term risk if they don't get proper sleep. Sleep quality mediates the association between chronotype and mental health. A study from India with young adults published in NPJ Mental Health Research in 2024. Chronotype affects not just when you're sharp, but whether you can maintain that sharpness across decades. Evening types who stay up late, cut sleep, and accumulate sleep debt will pay the price. Evening types who harness their evening window but still get 7 to 9 hours of sleep by shifting their schedule later, they may have the best of both worlds. A cross-sectional study from Lifeline's cohort in the Netherlands examined 23,798 participants aged 40 and older, published in a journal in April 2025. They used the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire, measuring midpoint sleep corrected for sleep debt on workdays. Cognition was assessed with the rough figural fluency test, measuring nonverbal fluency and executive functioning. Each 1 hour increase in chronotype, meaning later timing, corresponded to a 0.8-point decline in cognition per decade in the high educational group. Not in the low or middle educational groups. Educational attainment moderated the relationship. Sleep quality and current smoking mediated 13.52% and 18.64% of the association. So being an evening type in a highly educated population predicts faster cognitive decline, but only if you're not managing sleep quality and lifestyle factors. The chronotype itself isn't the problem. It's the mismatch between chronotype and societal demands, leading to chronic sleep deprivation and poor health behaviors. Fix the mismatch, and evening types thrive. A study published in Frontiers in Neuroscience in October 2025 examined chronotype, cognitive outcomes, and neural dynamics. They reviewed brain microstructure and resting state connections between different sleep chronotypes. Morning chronotypes were associated with difficulty sustaining attention, low verbal fluency, and poor executive control skills. Study by Demirji, published in 2025 with 180 participants. When executive function was assessed as a whole, evening chronotypes exhibited better performance in information processing speed compared to intermediate and morning types. Why? Ion channels. Studies show that L-type calcium current and fast-delayed rectifier potassium current inhibition affects firing during the day, when their respective current magnitudes are larger. Big conductance calcium-activated potassium channel inhibition affects firing at night when its current magnitude is larger. Study by Harvey, published in 2020. This ion current rhythm with diurnal periodic changes is the basis of sleep chronotype. Your neurons fire differently at night, different ion channels, different membrane potentials, different response properties. Evening types have neural hardware optimized for evening firing patterns. Montreal Cognitive Assessment Questionnaire. Recordings were done from 8 to 10 a.m. and from 4 to 6 p.m. on a single day. Power spectral analysis of EEG for alpha and beta waves at PZ and FZ cortical sites was done after subjecting selected epochs to fast Fourier transformation. Higher alpha and beta power was observed in evening types at PZ in the evening. Morning types showed increased P300 latency and amplitude during evening session for frequent and rare stimuli. Evening types showed the opposite. Significant negative correlation between latency of rare stimuli and alpha and beta power at FZ site during evening and evening chronotype only. Result indicates better attention and alertness during evening hours in evening chronotypes, and vice versa in morning chronotypes. Objective brainwave data, not self-report. Alpha and beta power, markers of alertness and cognitive engagement, spike in evening types during evening hours. 72 patients with sleep disorders following shift work were assigned to 5 milligrams melatonin before sleep, at night, after shifts or matched placebo. Data from 65 patients were analyzed. The melatonin group showed greater reduction in total short Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index score at week 1 and week 4, greater reduction in total occupational cognitive failure, questionnaire score at week 4. Time treatment interaction effects on both scores were significant. Melatonin was safely and tolerably superior to placebo in treating sleep disorders in the short term and improving occupational cognitive performance in the medium term. So you can manipulate the system, take melatonin to help reset circadian phase, get better sleep, improve cognitive performance, but the key is timing. Taking melatonin at the wrong time shifts your rhythm the wrong direction. Crepuscular domain, dusk and dawn, is when the SCN is most sensitive to melatonin. Take it 1 to 2 hours before desired bedtime. Not at random times, precision matters. Morning versus afternoon surgery affects perioperative disturbance of sleep-wake timing. Study published in Acta Anesthesiologica Scandinavica in 2025. Circadian misalignment is more common in elderly individuals due to progressive degeneration of molecular circadian mechanisms with age. Among various circadian rhythms, melatonin and cortisol secretion rhythms are most affected, but you can use bright light exposure in the morning to shift circadian phase earlier. Blue enriched light keeps you alert. Study by Chalapa, published in PLOS One in 2011. Evening exposure to LED backlit computer screens affects circadian physiology and cognitive performance. Study by Kayochin, published in Journal of Applied Physiology in 2011. Blue blocker glasses as countermeasure for alerting effects of evening LED screen exposure in male teenagers. Study by Vanderlele in Journal of Adolescent Health in 2014. You can engineer your light environment to optimize circadian alignment. Bright light in morning, dim warm light in evening, blue blockers after sunset if you must use screens. Strategic manipulation. A 2019 study in sleep by Facerchilds titled Resetting the Late Timing of Night Owls Has a Positive Impact on Mental Health and Performance. Evening types who shifted their sleep timing earlier showed improvements, but the intervention required waking up 2 to 3 hours earlier, maximizing outdoor light in the morning, eating breakfast as soon as possible, eating lunch at the same time each day, minimizing light exposure in the evening, and going to bed 2 to 3 hours earlier. After 3 weeks, participants shifted their sleep-wake timing, improved morning performance, reduced depression and stress, and improved physical reaction times. So chronotype isn't fixed. You can shift it, but it requires consistent environmental manipulation. And here's the question, should you? If your natural rhythm is evening, and you can structure your life to work with that rhythm instead of fighting it, why force a shift? The data shows evening types have cognitive advantages in the evening. If you're a programmer, writer, researcher, someone who can set their own schedule, lean into it. Work at night, sleep until 9 or 10 a.m., align with your biology. The world might judge. Let them. Your prefrontal cortex doesn't care about morning meetings. Study from Frontiers for Young Minds in 2024. Memory encoding and consolidation require sleep. Chronic REM sleep deprivation aggravates accumulation of amyloid beta plaques and tau protein tangles, critical in Alzheimer's pathogenesis. Study from a review on circadian rhythm dysfunction in neurodegenerative diseases published in 2025. So the evening window is powerful, but you can't skip sleep. You need both. Harness the evening peak, then sleep deeply, 7 to 9 hours. Let the consolidation happen. Wake when your body is ready. Repeat. That's the cycle. Urine samples were collected for 32 hours before day, evening, and night shifts to assess circadian phase using 6-sulfatoxin melatonin and cortisol. Before day, evening, and night shifts, 60 to 89% of officers were adapted to a day schedule based on melatonin rhythms. 71 to 78% adapted based on cortisol rhythms. Even after multiple night shifts, most officers didn't fully adapt to a nocturnal schedule. Adaptation to night-oriented schedule is slow. Sequences of fewer than 3 consecutive night shifts are unlikely to produce signs of adaptation in melatonin or cortisol rhythms. Even with 4 to 7 consecutive night shifts, changes aren't large enough for complete realignment. The circadian system resists nocturnal adaptation, so shift workers are fighting biology. Their evening hours at work don't become their new daytime, they remain misaligned. Cognitive performance suffers, accident rates increase, health deteriorates. The lesson? If you're going to work at night, do it consistently. Not rotating shifts, pick a schedule and stick with it for weeks or months. Let your rhythms adapt fully, or better, work with your chronotype. If you're an evening type, find work that starts late and ends late. Don't force yourself into a morning lark mold. The default mode network, involved in mind wandering and creativity, is more active when executive control networks quiet down. Evening hours, especially in evening types, may allow the brain to enter this diffuse mode. You're not grinding through focused tasks. You're making connections, seeing patterns, generating ideas. Then, when you do need focus, the dopamine surge from accumulated adenosine and reward salience kicks in. You alternate between modes, divergent thinking, then convergent execution. That's the evening advantage. Morning people wake up with high cortisol, high focus, but maybe less creative flexibility. Evening people start slow, but as the day progresses, they gain creative and then focused momentum. Different tools for different goals. They used optogenetics to stimulate visual cortex neurons in rats. Identical stimuli, different times, different responses. The mechanism involves adenosine's role in regulating cortical excitability. But they also noted the findings suggest our brains have daily windows of adaptability, times when learning and memory formation may be most effective, potentially near sunset for daytime active animals, sunset, twilight, crepuscular domain. In humans, this translates to evening hours, roughly 6 to 10 p.m. for most people. That's when neural plasticity peaks, when synaptic connections form most readily, when the prefrontal cortex is primed for encoding. If you're trying to learn something difficult, code a complex algorithm, write a nuanced argument, evening might be your best bet. Not because you're more awake, that's morning, but because your brain is more plastic. Here's a synthesis. Morning hours bring high cortisol, low adenosine, strong circadian drive for alertness. Good for routine tasks, established procedures. Morning types thrive here, but for tasks requiring cognitive flexibility, memory encoding, sustained focus without external pressure, evening hours offer unique advantages. Adenosine is elevated, but not overwhelming. Dopamine systems are primed. Cortisol is declining, reducing stress. Core body temperature is still slightly elevated, supporting metabolism. The SCN is transitioning from day mode to night mode, creating a window where different neural gates are open. Evening types hit their peak. Even morning types might find that certain cognitive tasks feel easier in the evening than at other times. It's not that night is universally better. It's that night offers a different neural state, and that state is optimal for specific cognitive demands. Study after study shows later school start times, improve grades, reduce car accidents, improve mental health. Same logic applies to adults. Many workplaces demand 9 to 5 or earlier, but 60% of adults with ADHD and 20 to 30% of the general population are evening types. They're being asked to perform cognitive work during their biological low point. Then they go home, and at 8 or 9 p.m., their brain finally wakes up. Too late. The workday is over, they feel frustrated, underutilized, out of sync. The answer isn't to drug everyone into morning compliance. It's to create flexible schedules. Remote work helps. Asynchronous communication helps. Results-oriented work environments help. Let people work when their brain works. Judge output, not hours. That shift would unlock massive productivity gains and improve mental health. There's also a cultural dimension. Some cultures value early rising. Others have siestas and late dinners. Spain, Italy, Greece. Dinner at 10 p.m. is normal. Nightlife thrives. Are those populations cognitively impaired? No, they've structured society around a different rhythm. Northern Europe, early dinners, early bedtimes, but also long dark winters that disrupt circadian rhythms. Seasonal affective disorder is more common. Vitamin D deficiency. The environment shapes the rhythm. In the modern world with artificial light, we can choose. We can create our own light-dark cycles. The question is whether we do it intelligently. Most people blast themselves with blue light all evening, tank their melatonin, then wonder why they can't sleep. Then they force themselves awake at 6 a.m. with caffeine, crash by 2 p.m. They struggle through the afternoon and finally feel awake at 8 p.m. when it's time to wind down. It's a disaster. The fix is simple. Dim lights after sunset, warm spectrum bulbs, blue blockers. Let melatonin rise naturally. Sleep when sleepy, wake when rested, work when sharp. It's not rocket science, it's respecting biology. They cite Benjamin Franklin, Early Bird Gets the Worm, The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma, The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. These books sell millions. They promise transformation. And for some people, they work. Morning types genuinely feel best in the morning. Their cortisol peaks early. Their SCN is wired for early phase. They should absolutely wake at 5 a.m. if that's when they thrive. But the error is universalizing, assuming everyone should do it. Assuming evening types are lazy or undisciplined. The data says otherwise. Evening types aren't lazy, they're biologically different. Their SCN hub cells fire at different phases, their ion channels have different rhythms, their melatonin and cortisol curves are shifted. Asking an evening type to be productive at 5 a.m. is like asking a morning type to code at 11 p.m. Possible, but not optimal. And if you chronically force it, you create circadian misalignment, sleep debt, and long-term cognitive decline. The solution is not to change the person, it's to change the expectation. Daily melatonin dosages range from 2 milligrams to 25 milligrams. Intervention durations range from 5 weeks to 3.5 years. Participants included patients with Alzheimer's, dementia, mild cognitive impairment. Administration times were 8:30 p.m., 9 p.m., or 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. Melatonin improved cognitive function, not just sleep, cognitive function. The mechanism? Melatonin is an antioxidant. It reduces oxidative stress in the brain. Oxidative stress damages neurons and impairs synaptic plasticity. By reducing oxidative stress, melatonin supports neuronal health and cognitive performance. And melatonin secretion naturally peaks at night. So working at night in dim light with naturally elevated melatonin might provide neuroprotective benefits. Bright light at night suppresses melatonin. Working under fluorescent lights until midnight tanks your melatonin, increasing oxidative stress, impairing cognition. Working in dim, warm light, allowing melatonin to rise, protects your brain. Another reason evening work can be superior if done correctly. Caffeine at 15 milligrams per kilogram promotes continuous wakefulness for about 2 hours. Modafinil at 90 milligrams per kilogram, 5 hours. Both spike dopamine in the prefrontal cortex and striatum, but caffeine has a half-life of about 5 hours. Drink coffee at 4 p.m., half is still in your system at 9 p.m. That delays sleep, reduces sleep quality, cuts REM sleep. So if you're working in the evening, be strategic with caffeine. Use it earlier in the day. By evening, rely on your natural dopamine surge from the circadian phase and accumulated sleep pressure. Our brains may have evolved to use evening hours for complex thought, daytime for action, evening for integration. Realigning with our evolutionary template might mean accepting that evening is prime time for cognitive work. Elevated ADHD symptoms correlated with delayed circadian phase and poorer sleep. But when ADHD individuals aligned their schedule with their natural chronotype, symptoms improved. The ADHD brain doesn't fit the morning mold. The pathology isn't the brain, it's the mismatch between the brain and societal expectations. Synchronize your circadian rhythm to a later phase. Adenosine accumulation creates a unique window of synaptic plasticity near sunset. Dopamine systems in the prefrontal cortex are primed by accumulated sleep pressure without overwhelming fatigue. Cortisol declines, reducing stress, while core body temperature remains elevated. Supporting neural metabolism, melatonin begins to rise, providing antioxidant neuroprotection in dim light environments. The salience network engages more fully as distractions fade and reward signals clarify. And evolutionary patterns suggest evening hours were designed for reflective cognitive work rather than reactive physical tasks. None of this means morning people are wrong. They have their own advantages. High cortisol for urgent tasks, fresh start after sleep, alignment with societal schedules. But the insistence that morning is universally superior is contradicted by decades of neuroscience research published through 2026, showing that chronotype is biological, evening types have cognitive strengths in evening hours, and forcing everyone into a morning schedule creates widespread circadian misalignment, sleep deprivation, and cognitive impairment. Track when you feel sharpest. For many, that's evening. Structure your work accordingly. Use morning for routine tasks, meetings, emails. Save deep work for evening. Protect your sleep. 7 to 9 hours. Dim lights after sunset. Warm spectrum bulbs. Blue blockers if needed. No caffeine after 2 p.m. Exercise earlier in the day. Eat dinner a few hours before bed. Create a wind down routine. Let melatonin rise naturally. Sleep when sleepy. Wake when rested. Don't force it. And if society judges you for sleeping until 9 a.m. and working until midnight, remember the data. Evening types perform better on cognitive tests. They have higher alpha and beta power in the evening. They encode memories more effectively in your sunset. They show greater information processing speed. They peak when the world is quiet and focus is possible. You're not lazy, you're optimized. In late 2025, neuroscientists at Washington University identified that among the 20,000 neurons in the SCN, only a few hundred hub cells expressing vasoactive intestinal peptide actually control the entire circadian network. Remove those hub cells and synchrony collapses. Every person's circadian rhythm, their entire sleep-wake cycle, their cognitive performance across the day, hinges on a few hundred neurons smaller than a grain of sand buried in the hypothalamus. And those neurons fire differently in morning types versus evening types. They don't choose their rhythm, it's hardwired, determined by genetics, ion channel expression, synaptic connectivity. You are your SCN. And if your SCN is wired for evening, fighting it is fighting yourself. The early bird gets the worm, but the night owl gets the code written, the essay finished, the problem solved. And in a world that values cognitive output over morning attendance, the night owl wins.